Hello and welcome to Atlantic Debrief, the Atlantic Council Europe Center's internet show and podcast focusing on the most pressing issues impacting transatlantic relations. My name is Johan Fleck. I'm the acting director of the Europe Center here at the Council, and we're delighted to have with us today Reinhard Bütikofer, member of the European Parliament for the German Green Party and chairman of the European Parliament's Delegation for Relations with the People's Republic of China, and someone who's been a very outspoken and vocal critic of China policy on the EU and German side, someone who's been a close observer and a driver of policy change in that sphere as well. So a warm welcome, Reinhard. You're the first to join us in person for Atlantic Debrief, so first for the show. And thank you for being with us.
Well, it's a pleasure, Jan, to be here with you.
Well, let me kick off here real quick with obviously the elephant in the room, the 20th Party Congress of the Chinese Communist Party last week. We saw President Xi Jinping consolidate his power in the end to what was left of collective leadership, maybe. What are your key takeaways from that Party Congress, and how do you think what we saw there should inform policy and posture in Brussels and Berlin vis-a-vis Beijing?
Well, as you already said, Jörn, I think the results of the conference confirmed what most observers had assumed anyhow. It did indeed establish the unhindered absolute power of Xi Jinping as the Communist Party emperor. He surrounded himself with hand-picked yes-men, anybody that could be plausibly pursuing their own perspectives or might want to even have discussions was cast out. This absolute control comes with an obsessive sense of danger, and that's an interesting combination. Over the last couple of party conferences, the Communist Party of China would always sort of use a propaganda line that says the circumstances are favorable for China's rise. We take advantage of all that. Here, for the first time, there was a different tone. The tone is, it's going to get difficult. We have to struggle. Struggle was one of the core terms of Xi Jinping's discourse. And he signaled that he would continue pursuing even more ambitiously a policy that you could describe as securitization of everything. Everything is a risk. The slightest deviation is a risk. I'm sure he recalls that Mao once said, even a spark can light a prairie fire. So he doesn't want his control going down in flames. And he also doubled down on the aggressive policies vis-a-vis the international community. Also in this context, China's international role, struggle was the central term. No criticism of China is at all acceptable. China is not explaining, China is not defending, China is just moving forward, railroading, if they can, all opposition against their hegemonic and imperialist ambitions. And that is worrying. And some of the markets reacted to that, but I'm not sure that all the policymakers around the world have really yet digested the dimension in which this is going to pose huge challenges to all of us. And I believe that nobody can, having listened to the party conference, having looked at the results, assume that there is going to be any benevolence on the part of the PRC as an international player. So everybody get ready for a rough ride, fasten your seatbelt, and try to work with like-minded partners.
I want to delve into a number of the points you just made, Reinhard. So buckle up, you're saying, for the rest of the world. We have to talk, if we take Berlin, Brussels, and then transatlantic maybe, we have to talk about the port of Hamburg. For those that haven't followed this little episode or saga, or maybe not so little, the Chinese state-controlled shipping giant COSCO was about to receive a stake with a minority blocking right in the port of Hamburg. That sparked a huge controversy within the coalition government that the German Greens are part of, where your Minister of Foreign Affairs and Minister of the Economy led the charge against this deal, and we just had a sort of compromise announced. What are your views of that compromise that includes a reduced share for COSCO in the port of Hamburg? And can you talk a little bit about how that is shaping the German debate on China, how this episode has? And maybe to put it pointedly, is Germany's economy and business model at the moment just simply under too much pressure for a real policy shift on China, one away from China, away from dependencies, away from vulnerabilities?
Well, that's been a couple of questions.
Yes.
So let me try to focus on some of them. I would say that had the public conversation started 4, 6, or 8 weeks ago, the outcome of the controversy might have been very different. But unfortunately, those that had misgivings about the deal, that saw risk in the deal, didn't organize effectively early on. It is important to state that this is not just a controversy between the Social Democratic Chancellor and the Greens. There were 6 ministries concerned with the deal, some of them led by Social Democrats, some led by the Free Democrats, some led by our people. They all unanimously opposed the deal. The European Commission opposed the deal. Just today, a group of sinologists from Hamburg published an appeal against the deal. The overwhelming public opinion is against this deal because allowing a state-controlled Chinese multinational to control sensitive infrastructure is not a good idea. Put it very simply. We have learned, in the case of Ukraine, in our confrontation with this aggressor, Vladimir Putin, that allowing yourselves to become dependent on an authoritarian regime is counterindicated, to say it very mildly. It's a big mistake. Germany has made many mistakes in the Russia policy over the years. I could claim that we were opposing that. We have been justified by the development, but still, as a nation, we should learn a wider lesson. If it is wrong to be dependent on Putin, why should it be right to be dependent on Xi, who is a much more powerful player? And unfortunately, we're still at the beginning of this debate. And I would assume that this episode might be a very educational one. You will recall that in 2016, a so-called private company from China, under instructions of the Communist Party, endeavored to buy one of the crown jewels of German technology, namely the robotics company KUKA. At the time, nobody found a way of avoiding that, but the fact that we were not able to stop that then led to industrial policy consequences like investment screening, bolstering the ability to protect sensitive infrastructure. Maybe this episode in the Hamburg harbor, which doesn't stand alone, by the way, other European harbors have done similar deals. Even American harbors have done such deals. At least 4 American harbors have an arrangement that is similar to the one that we will get now in Hamburg. So everybody has good reason to be self-critical, but I hope that we will be able to learn from that defeat. The compromise is not a compromise. It's a mistake. It's putting lipstick on a pig. We shouldn't mince words.
So coming back to that a little bit, my last question in that series is we're now, as we're talking here, 8 months to the day after the Zeitenwende speech. And so the expectations of Germany learning, transferring those lessons from its failed Russia policy maybe to its China policy, I think the expectations of that knowledge transfer are high abroad, at least, or in Washington, D.C. And I think the Zeitenwende speech and narrative fuels that expectation. What do you see as the key obstacles to that transfer, that, you know, what we failed on in Russia, in Germany, on Russia policy should apply to Berlin's China policy?
Well, first of all, I would emphasize that one speech that the Chancellor gave 3 days after the beginning of the invasion really changed a lot. And if you look at where Germany stands today and where we stood before that, that's a sea change. We used to have a policy of not exporting arms into a hot conflict. Now we're providing Ukraine even with heavy armament. We had a Russia policy that was guided by illusionism. That's gone. I think I can confidently say that Germany's Russia policy will never again be where it had been, with the support of all the major parties in the country, with the exception just of the Greens. That's a lesson we learned. But transferring that lesson also to China policy is difficult. And one of the factors there is that in the German debate, the relative weight of the Russia conversation and the China conversation is different from what it is here in Washington. For us, Russia, that's the fundamental, the existential challenge. What Putin is doing is not just trying to wipe Ukraine off the map of Europe. He is trying to destroy the security architecture of the whole continent that we built over decades. So that is a challenge that goes to the core. Whereas here in Washington, people understand that they have to push back, and we are very grateful for the leadership that President Biden has provided in that context, and all the support that the US government has given. And I hope that those voices from the far right of the Republican Party and the far left of the Democratic Party that question that policy will not prevail. But still, for the US, China is the central challenge. That's different. And we will still have to learn that we cannot sort of ignore or put off the China challenge because we're confronted with what Putin is creating at the moment. There are some voices that say, look, with all the hassle that we have on our hands with them Russians, why pick another battle with the Chinese? We can't fight on two fronts successfully. I would argue it's not two fronts. They're like Siamese twins. They're joined at the hip. This is a revisionist alliance of dictators, authoritarian leaders, totalitarian leaders that want to overturn the global order, transform it into a post-Westphalian order where the big powers can control their front yard and their backyard, and where smaller countries can enjoy their sovereignty only with a rebate. I believe this is a conversation that is only just beginning, and for good reasons. We're focusing now on mastering the Russian challenge, and we're not beyond that. Because of the mistakes that our country has made in the past, allowing ourselves to be dependent on fossil energy supply from Russia, we're experiencing a couple of problems there. The transition is difficult. There's a good consensus that we want to do this. I'm optimistic that we will succeed with all the pain that this will include. And I'm also optimistic that we will be able to learn the wider lesson.
You already mentioned the transatlantic dimension, but even at an EU level and at an US-EU level, where do you think that conversation that you said has started? Where are we there? What do you see as the key dynamics, and how do we get to more action? Or do you see foresee, especially with the midterms here and a much more assertive US stance, more potential for conflict at a transatlantic level on China?
Well, on an EU level, I would argue that over the last 6 years, European countries have come closer together. We have developed a whole range of trade defense instruments to push back against unfair Chinese trade and investment practices. That should not be underestimated. We also can point out that the divisive strategies that China has pursued in trying to peel off the Central European countries from the rest of the EU through the so-called 16 or 17+1 format has failed. The number is dwindling. Now, we stand at 14+1 as we speak, and it's going to go down. Also, the other outlier in China policy around Europe, Germany, is playing a different role. The Merkel government would never acknowledge that we have really a systemic rivalry with the Chinese system. She never used the word. The new government has set out to pursue a different policy, a more European integrated policy, a policy where we also argue we should team up with our transatlantic partners. So clearly, I think we're on a positive trajectory, but that is, of course, still an ongoing process. And this is not just playing out in the political arena, it's also playing out in the business community. When you listen to economic voices from Germany, you hear quite different messages. Some of the CEOs of multinational corporations would, if they could, hold on to a win-win idealism or illusionism, I would say. Whereas the German Federation of Industry, BDI, for instance, and many actors in the broader business community, the SME, the famous German Mittelstand, have a much more critical attitude. So I think we're on a positive way, but of course this cannot be addressed adequately without also questioning the success, the hypothetical future success of the business model that Germany has pursued over the years. I mean, some critics put it this way. Our business model was built on cheap Russian energy and cheap Chinese commodities and a wide open Chinese market. Cheap Russian energy is gone. The wide open Chinese market still exists to some degree, but the prospect is, when you look at China's trade and investment and economic policy, which is quite nationalistic, that this is not going to be a bonanza forever. So there has to be a reassessment. And we're in that process. The government has promised to come up with a new China strategy, probably somewhere between March and May next year. And I hope we will have really a broad-based public debate. I can say that at the moment, there is more overlap than I've ever seen before between the human rights crowd, where I count myself, the national security people, and a wide array of the business community. And I think that's a positive point.
Thank you so much, Reinhard. Ending on a positive note, a real pleasure talking to you as always. At Atlantic Debrief, we will continue this conversation with Reinhard and others on China and the transatlantic perception of China, and we look forward to having you with us again very soon. Thank you again, Reinhard.
Thank you, John.